Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hope you're all doing well. Hope you all had a great day, great Mondays. How is everybody doing? What's up, New Zealand fam? Leighton, Layla, Nana, Katrina, appreciate you. Matt, Gooch, always good to see you. Kara, good to see you always. I'm doing okay. I'm doing okay. I was about to come live and make a statement. I will say that I've been a little bit on the high end of emotional today. Hey, what's going on, Rafa? I hope you're doing well today, brother. And of course, I woke up, I read some pretty gnarly stuff. And the one thing that I did is the one thing that I don't believe in. And that is I got angry. I got angry at what I was seeing. And so, without getting into it and hijacking the reading stream, I'm going to reiterate what I say at the end of every single live stream. And that is, it takes $0 to be a good person. It takes $0 to be a good person. And maybe it was the way I was raised, maybe it was my upbringing. But the one thing that I will say is that there's no room for hate, there's no room for anger, there's no room for trolls anywhere near me, my chat, my community. So if I do see trolls in my chat, in my community, anybody associating with said trolls will no longer be welcome. And this is my valid promise to everybody. I'm not going to have it. Period. That's all I'm going to say about it. Late lunch now. Great timing for us. Now it's time to relax. Now it's time to relax. I am glad that you're having an okay day thus far. Lolo, it's good to see you, Lori. I believe we did the first 7 chapters, so we're going to do chapter 8 through 14 tonight. The book is 28 chapters long, so I figured 4 streams of 7 chapters and we would be there. And then we will move on to the next book. But first, we are going to solve ourselves a 4x4. Gotten really, really good at it. And so that's what we will do. See my time here, 3:30. We'll call it. And we'll see where we can go. But tell me, everybody, how are you doing? Everybody ready to relax and read, head back to Mars? Here, as per always, appreciate you. It's really good to see you guys. Man, when I say I had a Monday, I definitely had a Monday. Monday was being very Monday, so. Which I'm okay with, as long as Monday stays Monday, and like no other, what is happening here? No other day tries to compete with Monday. Sound logic. It's only logical. Okay. That's the magic spot right there. Just like that. All right, cool. Now we get to pairing. Was ready to relax and listen to you read. Excellent. I love that, and I hope that you are feeling all the stronger. Nana Katrina, our love and well wishes are with you, and it's good to see you guys. Oh no, too early for that. Up. All right, all right. Welcome in, everybody. Make sure to get your favorite drink and beverage ready, no matter what that may be today. Grab your favorite pillow and or blanket and or person and cuddle up. I'm kind of excited for this read because I think we're finally going to get a little bit of dialogue between some of the Martians and John Carter. So I'm really looking forward to that. But this is all blue. What am I doing? No idea. And you can tell I have had a day building cubes wrong. Hey, Charlie. Got my hot chocolate, my headphones, got a Switch game ready to go. Let's go. Good to see you, Charlie. Hope you had a eventful Monday. Not too difficult, of course. Feeling better, but body isn't ready to be helpful just yet. 3 to 6 months rehab for her. You got this, Nana Katrina. Strongest woman that I know. Tough day, but not a bad one. I would say that's fairly accurate. I would say the workday wasn't necessarily a bad one. It was just a long, tiring, just the standard people and questioning my intelligence, all that good noise. So, all right, there we are. Got 5 of you in here ready to go. Appreciate you guys being here. My early bird gang, my early ghosts. We're just at about that 9-minute mark. We'll give it 60 more seconds while I pull up the book, and then we will get started on our read. We're getting back into A Princess of Mars, the stories of John Carter. And I swear, I'm not going to want to call him John Connor one day. One day. Much love, Alec. Much love to you, brother. Appreciate you. Appreciate you being here. It's not a tumor. It might be a tumor. That's funny. That is funny right there. Great movie. I think that was Kindergarten Cop, if I'm not mistaken. All right. Got one more in here, Mr. Alec. Appreciate you being here. Pull up a chair, grab your favorite beverage. We are about to go back to Mars. And the last thing that we learned is that he's slowly learning how to communicate telepathically, and often when they are not intended for him. And that's really where we got. He's starting to learn their culture a little bit more. So let's see exactly where we go from there. And we're going to start with Chapter 8, A Fair Captive from the Sky. The third day after the incubator ceremony, we set forth towards home. But scarcely had the head of the procession debauched into the open ground before the city than orders were given for an immediate and hasty return. As though trained for years in this particular evolution, the green Martians melted like mist into the spacious doorways of the nearby buildings until, in less than 3 minutes, the entire cavalcade of chariots, mastodons, and mounted warriors was nowhere to be seen. Sola and I had entered the building upon the front of the city, in fact, the same one in which I had had my encounter with the apes, and, wishing to see what had caused the sudden retreat, I mounted to an upper floor and peered from a window out over the valley and the hills beyond. And there I saw the cause of their sudden scurrying to cover. A huge craft, long, low, and gray-painted, swung slowly over the crest of the nearest hill. Following it came another, and another, and another, until 20 of them, swinging low above the ground, sailed slowly and majestically towards us. Each carried a strange banner swung from stem to stern above the upper works, and upon the prow of each was painted some odd device that gleamed in the sunlight, and showed plainly, even at a distance at which we were from the vessels. I could see figures crowding the forward decks and upper works of the aircraft. Whether they had discovered us or simply were looking at the deserted sky, I couldn't say. But in any event, they received a rude reception, for suddenly and without warning, the green Martian warriors fired a terrific volley from the windows of the buildings facing the little valley across which the great ships were so peacefully advancing. Instantly, the scene changed as by magic. The foremost vessel swung broadside towards us, and bringing her guns into play, returned our fire at the same time, moving parallel to our front for a short distance, and then turning back with the evident intention of completing a great circle, which would bring her up to position once more opposite our firing line. The other vessels followed in her wake, each one opening upon us as she swung into position. Our own fire never diminished, and I doubt if 25% of our shots went wild. It had never been given me to see such deadly accuracy of aim, and it seems as though a little figure on top of the craft dropped at an explosion of each bullet, while the banners of the upperworks dissolved in spurts of flame as the irresistible projectiles of our warriors mowed through them. The fire from our vessels was more ineffectual owing, as I afterward learned, to the unexpected suddenness of the first volley, which caught the ship's crews entirely unprepared, and the sighting apparatus of the guns unprotected from the deadly aim of our warriors. It seems that each green warrior has certain objective points for his fire under relatively identical circumstances of warfare. For example, a proportion of them, always the best marksmen, direct their fire entirely upon the wireless, finding, and sighting apparatus of the big guns of an attacking naval force. Another detail attends to the smaller guns in the same way. Others pick off gunners. Still others, the officers, while certain other quotas concentrate their attention upon the other members of the crew, upon the upper works, and upon the steering gear and propellers. 20 minutes after the first volley, the great fleet swung trailing off in a direction from which it had first appeared. Several of the craft were limping perceptibly, and seemed but barely under the control of their depleted crews. Their fire had ceased entirely, and all their energy seemed focused upon escape. Our warriors then rushed up to the roofs of the buildings which we occupied, and followed the retreating armada with the continuous fusillade of deadly fire. One by one, however, the ships managed to dip below the crest of the outlying hills until only one barely moving craft was in sight. This had received the brunt of our fire, and seemed to be entirely unmanned, as not a moving figure was visible upon the decks. Slowly she swung from her course, circling back towards us in an erratic and pitiful manner. Instantly the warriors ceased firing, for it was quite apparent that the vessel was entirely helpless, and, far from being in the position to inflict harm upon us, she could not even control herself sufficiently to escape. As she neared the city, the warriors rushed out upon the plain to meet her, but it was evident that she was still too high for them to hope to reach her decks. From my vantage point in the window, I could see the bodies of her crew strewn about, although I could not make out what manner of creatures they might be. Not a sign of life was manifest upon her as she drifted slowly with the light breeze in the southeasterly direction. She was drifting some 50 feet above the ground, followed by all but some 100 of the warriors who had been ordered back to the roofs to cover the possibility of a returning fleet or of reinforcements. It soon became evident that she would strike the face of the buildings about a mile south of our position, and as I watched the progress of the chase, I saw a number of warriors gallop ahead, dismount, and enter the building she seemed destined to touch. As the crafts neared the building, and just before she struck, the Martian warriors swarmed upon her from the windows, and with their great spears eased the shock of the collision. And in a few moments they had thrown out grappling hooks, and the big boat was being hauled to the ground by the fellows below. After making her fast, they swarmed the sides and searched the vessel from stem to stern, and could see them examining the dead soldiers, evidently for signs of life. And presently a party of them appeared from below, dragging a little figure among them. The creature was considerably less than half as tall as the green Martian warriors, and from my balcony I could see that it walked erect, upon two legs, and surmised that it was some new and strange Martian monstrosity with which I had not yet become acquainted. They removed their prisoner from the ground, and then commenced a systematic rifling of the vessel. This operation required several hours, during which time a number of chariots were requisitioned to transport the loot, which consisted in arms, ammunition, silks, furs, jewels, strangely carved stone vessels, and a quantity of solid foods and liquids, including many casks of water, and the first I had ever seen in my advent upon Mars. After the last load had been removed, the warriors made lines fast to the craft and toward her far out into the valley in a southwesterly direction. A few of them then boarded her and were busily engaged in what appeared, from my distant position, as the emptying of the contents of various carboys upon the dead bodies of the sailors and over the decks of the works of the vessel. This operation concluded, they hastily clambered over the side, sliding down the guy ropes to the ground. The last warrior to leave the deck turned and threw something back upon the vessel, waited an instant to note the outcome of his act. As a faint spurt of flame rose from the point where the missile struck, he swung over the side and was quickly upon the ground. Scarcely had he alighted than the guy ropes were simultaneously released, and the great warship, lighted by the removal of the loot, soared majestically into the air, her decks and upper works a mass of roaring flames. Slowly she drifted to the southeast, rising higher and higher as the flames ate away her wooden parts and diminished the weight upon her. Ascending to the roof of the building, I watched her for hours, until finally she was lost in the dim vistas of the distance. The sight was awe-inspiring in an extreme as one contemplated this mighty floating funeral pyre, drifting unguided and unmanned through the lonely wastes of the Martian heavens, a derelict of death and destruction, type-defying the life story of these strange and ferocious creatures into whose unfriendly hands fate had carried it. Much depressed, and to me, unaccountably so, I slowly descended to the street. The scene I had witnessed seemed to mark the defeat and annihilation of the forces of the kindred people, rather than the rooting by the green warriors of a horde of similar, though unfriendly creatures. I could not fathom them seeing me. I could not fathom the seeming hallucination, nor could I free myself from it. But somewhere in the innermost recesses of my soul I felt a strange yearning toward these unknown foemen, and a mighty hope surged through me that the fleet would return and demand a reckoning from the green warriors who had so ruthlessly and wantonly attacked it. Close at my heel, In his now accustomed place followed Wula, the hound, and as I emerged upon the street, Sola rushed up to meet me as though I had been an object of some search on her part. The cavalcade was returning to the plaza, the homeward march having been given up for that day, nor, in fact, it was recommended for more than a week, owing to the fear and return attack by the aircraft. Larquas Pommel was too astute an old warrior to be caught upon the open plains with a caravan of chariots and children, and so we remained at the deserted city until the danger seemed to pass. As Sola and I entered the plaza, a sight met my eyes which filled my whole being with such a great surge of mingled hope, fear, exultation, and depression, and yet most dominant was the subtle sense of relief and happiness. For just as we neared the throng of Martians, I caught a glimpse of the prisoner from the battlecraft, who was being roughly dragged into a nearby building by a couple of green Martian females. Hmm? And the sight which met my eyes was that of a slender, girlish figure, similar in every detail to an earthly woman of my past life. She did not see me at first, but just as she was disappearing through the portal of the building, which was to be her prison, she turned, and her eyes met mine. Her face was oval and beautiful in the extreme. Her every feature was finely chiseled and exquisite, her eyes large and lustrous, and her head, surmounted by a mass of coal-black waving hair, caught loosely into a strange yet becoming coiffure. Her skin was of a light reddish copper color, against which the crimson glow of her cheeks and the ruby of her beautifully molded lips shone with a strangely enhancing effect. She was destitute of clothes, as the green Martians who accompanied her; indeed, save for her highly wrought ornaments, she was entirely naked, nor could any apparel have enhanced the beauty of her perfect and symmetrical figure. As her gaze rested on me, her eyes opened wide in astonishment, and she made a little sign with her free hand, a sign which I did not, of course, understand. Just a moment we gazed upon each other, and then the look of hope and renewed courage which had glorified her face as she discovered me faded into one of utter dejection, mingled with loathing and contempt. I realized I had not answered her signal, and ignorant as I was of Martian customs, I intuitively felt that she had made an appeal for succor or protection, with my unfortunate ignorance had prevented me from answering. And then she was dragged out of my sight into the depths of the deserted edifice. Hey, Tyler, how's it going? Appreciate you being here. It's always good to see you, my friend. Got 5 ghosty readers in the chat. Just finished chapter 8. And now that's how you portray a battle. And then very Vikingly, they looted the ship, set it on fire, and sent it on its way. Excuse me. Got surprised by the mail today. Thank you again, Mr. Cat. Absolutely, man. I'm glad it arrived, and I'm glad it arrived safely. Let's get into chapter 9. I learned the language. As I came back to myself, I glanced at Sola, who had witnessed this encounter, and I was surprised to note a strange expression upon her usually expressionless countenance. What her thoughts were I did not know, for as yet I had learned but little of the Martian tongue, only enough to suffice for my daily needs. As I reached the doorway of our building, a strange surprise awaited me. A warrior approached, bearing the arms, ornaments, and full accoutrements of his kind. These he presented to me with a few intelligible words, at the bearing at once respectful and menacing. Later, Sola, with the aid of several of the other women, remodeled the trappings to fit my lesser proportions, and after they completed the work, I went about garbed in all the panoply of war. Panoply? That's a new word. From then on, Sola instructed me in the mysteries of his various weapons, and with the Martian young, I spent several hours each day practicing upon the plaza. I was not yet proficient with all the weapons, but my great familiarity with similar earthly weapons made me an unusually apt pupil, and I progressed in a very satisfactory manner. The training of myself and the young Martians was conducted solely by the women, who not only attended to the education of the young in the arts and individual defenses and offense, but there were also artisans who produce every manufactured article wrought by the Green Martians. They make the powder, the cartridges, the firearms. In fact, everything of value is produced by the females. In time of actual warfare, they form a part of the reserves, and when the necessity arises, fight with even greater intelligence and ferocity than the men. The men are trained in the higher branches of the art of war, in strategy, and the maneuverings of large bodies of troops. They make the laws as they are needed, a new law for each emergency. They are unfettered by precedent and the administration of justice. Customs have been handed down by ages of repetition, but the punishment for ignoring a custom is a matter for individual treatment by a jury of the culprit's peers, and I may say that justice seldom misses fire. But it seems rather to rule in inverse ratio to the uh, ascendancy of ascendancy of law. In one respect, at least, the Martians are a happy people. They have no lawyers. I did not see the prisoner again for several days subsequent to our first encounter, and then only to catch a fleeting glimpse of her as she was being conducted to the great audience chamber where she had had my first meeting with Lorquas Pommel. I could not but note the unnecessary harshness and brutality with which the guards treated her, so different from the almost maternal kindliness which Sola manifested towards me, and the respectful attitude of the few Green Martians who took the trouble to notice me at all. I had observed on the 2 occasions when I had seen her that the prisoner exchanged words with her guards, and this convinced me that they spoke, or at least could make themselves understood by a common language. With this added incentive, I nearly drove Sola, distracted by my importunities, and to hasten on my education, and within a few more days I had mastered the Martian tongue sufficiently well to enable me to carry on a passable conversation and to fully understand practically all that I heard. At this time, our sleeping quarters were occupied by 3 or 4 females and a couple of the recently hatched young, besides Sola, and her youthful ward, myself, and Woola the hound. After they had retired for the night, it was customary for the adults to carry on a desultory conversation for the short time after lapsing into sleep. A short time before lapsing into sleep. And now that I could understand their language, I was always a keen listener, although I never proffered any remarks myself. On the night following the prisoner's visit to the audience chambers, the conversation finally fell upon the subject, and I was all ears in an instant. I had feared to question Sola relative to the beautiful captive, as I could not but recall the strange expression I had noted upon her face after my first encounter with the prisoner. That it denoted jealousy, I could not say, and yet, judging all things by mundane standards, as I still did, I felt it safer to affect indifference in the matter until I learned more surely Sola's attitude toward the object of my solicitude. Sarkoja, one of the older women who shared our domicile, had been present at the audience, as was one of the captive's guards, and it was towards her the question turned. "When," asked one of the women, "will we enjoy the death throes of the Red One? Or does Lorquas Pommel, Jed, intend holding her for a ransom? They have decided to carry her with us back to Thark and exhibit her last agonies at the great games before Talhajas," replied Sarkoja. "What will the manner of her going out?" inquired Sola. "She is very small and very beautiful. I had hoped that they would hold her for ransom." Sarkoja and the other women grunted angrily at this evidence of weakness on the part of Sola. "It is sad, Sola, that you were not born 1,000,000 years ago," snapped Sarkoja, "when all the hollows of this land were filled with water, and the peoples were as soft as the stuff they sailed upon. In our day, we have progressed to the point where such sentiments mark weakness and atavism. It will not be well for you to permit Tarkus to learn that you hold such degenerate sentiments, as I doubt that he would care to entrust such as you with the grave responsibilities of maternity. I see nothing wrong with my expression of interest in this red woman, retorted Sola. She has never harmed us, nor would she should she have fallen into her hands. It is only the men of her kind who are at war upon us, and I have ever thought that her attitude towards us is but a reflection of ours towards them. They live at peace with all their fellows, except when duty calls upon them to make war, while we are at peace with none, forever warring amongst our own kind as well as upon the red men. And even in our own communities, the individuals fight amongst themselves. Oh, it is one continual awful period of bloodshed from the time we break the shell until we gladly embrace the bosom of the river of mystery in the dark and ancient East, which carries us to an unknown, but at least no more frightful and terrible existence. Fortunate indeed is he who meets his end at an early death. Say what you please to Tartarchus, he can mete out no worse fate to me than to the continuation of the horrible existence we are forced to lead in this life. A wild outbreak on the part of Sola so greatly surprised and shocked the other women that, after a few words of general reprimand, they all lapsed to a silence and were soon asleep. One thing the episode had accomplished was to assure me of Sola's friendliness toward the poor girl, and also to convince me that I had been extremely fortunate in falling into her hands rather than those of some of the other females. I knew that she was fond of me, and now that I had discovered that she hated cruelty and barbarity, I was confident that I could depend upon her to aid me and the girl captive to escape, provided, of course, that such a thing was within the range of possibility. I did not even know that there were any better conditions to escape to, but I was more than willing to take my chances among people fashioned after my own mold rather than to remain longer among the hideous and bloodthirsty green men of Mars. But where to go, and how, was as much of a puzzle to me as the age-old search for the spring of eternal life that has been to earthly men since the beginning of time. I decided that at the first opportunity I would take Sola into my confidence and openly ask her to aid me. And with this resolution strong upon me, I turned among my silks and furs and slept the dreamless and refreshing sleep of Mars. Okay, they communicate a little bit odd. What's up, Mystic? No worries at all. I hope you have a good rest of your night. Yes, they communicate quite odd. I might have to get my accent on. Sorry, y'all. As I mentioned, it was a long day at work. And the writing is, how I say, very old, and the punctuation isn't as strong as I would like it to be. But let's slow down. Let's take a breath. Let's reset. And let's read chapter 10, which is Champion and Chief. Early the next morning, I was astir. Considerable freedom was allowed to me, as Sola had informed me that so long as I did not attempt to leave the city, I was free to go and come as I pleased. She had warned me, however, against venturing forth unarmed, as this city, like all other deserted metropolises of the ancient Martian civilization, was peopled by the great white apes of my second day's adventure. In advising me that I must not leave the boundaries of the city, Sola had explained that Woola would prevent this anyway, should I attempt it, and she warned me most urgently not to arouse his fierce nature by ignoring his warning, should I venture too close to the forbidden territory. His nature was such, she said, that he would bring me back to the city, dead or alive, should I persist in opposing him. Preferably dead, she added. On this morning, I had chosen a new street to explore when suddenly I found myself at the limits of the city. Before me were low hills pierced by narrow and inviting ravines. I longed to explore the country before me and, like the prisoner stock from which I sprang, to view that landscape beyond the encircling hills might disclose from its summits which shut out my view. It also occurred to me It also occurred to me that this would prove an excellent opportunity to test the qualities of Woola. I was convinced that the brute loved me, and had seen me more evidences of affection in him than any other Martian animal, man or beast. And I was sure that gratitude for the acts that had twice saved his life would more than outweigh his loyalty to the duty imposed upon him by cruel and loveless masters. As I approached the boundary line, Woola ran anxiously before me and thrust his body against my legs. His expression was pleading rather than ferocious. Nor did he bare his great tusks or utter his fearful guttural warnings. Denied the friendship and companionship of my kind, I had developed considerable affection for Woola and Sola, for the normal earthly man must have some outlet for his natural affections. And so I decided upon an appeal to a like instinct in this great brute, sure that I would not be disappointed. I had never petted nor fondled him, but now I sat upon the ground, and putting my arms around his heavy neck, I stroked and coaxed him, talking in my newly acquired Martian tongue as I would have to my hound at home, as I would have talked to any other friend among the lower animals. His response to my manifestation of affection was remarkable to a degree. He stretched his great mouth to its full width, baring the entire expanse of his upper rows of tusks, and wrinkling his snout until his great eyes were almost hidden by the folds of his flesh. If you have ever seen a collie smile, you may have some idea of Woola's facial distortion. He threw himself upon his back and fairly wallowed at my feet, jumped up and sprang upon me, rolling me upon the ground by his great weight, then wriggling and squirming around me like a playful puppy, presenting its back for the petting it craves. I could not resist the ludicrousness of the spectacle, and holding my sides, I rocked back and forth in the first laughter which had passed my lips in many days, the first, in fact, since the morning Powell had left camp, when his horse, long unused, had perceptibly been unexpectedly bucked him off, head foremost, into the pot of frijoles. My laughter frightened Woola. His antics ceased, and he crawled pitifully towards me, poking his ugly head far into my lap, and then I remembered what laughter signified on Mars: tortured, suffering, death. Quieting myself, I rubbed the poor fellow's head and back and talked to him for a few moments, and then, in an authoritative tone, I commanded him to follow me, and arising, starting for the hills. There were no further question of authority between us. Woola was my devoted slave from that moment hence, and I his only and undisputed master. My walk to the hills occupied but a few minutes, and I found nothing of particular interest to reward me. Numerous brilliantly colored and strangely formed wildflowers dotted the ravines, and from the summit of the first hill I saw still other hills stretching off toward the north, and rising one range above the other, until lost in mountains of quite respectable dimensions, though I afterward found that only a few peaks of all Mars exceed 4,000 feet in height. The suggestion of magnitude was merely relative. My morning's walk had been large with importance for me, for it had resulted in a perfect understanding with Woola, upon whom Taurus Tarkus relied for my safekeeping. I now knew that while theoretically a prisoner, I was virtually free, and I hastened to regain the city limits before the defection of Woola could be discovered by his erstwhile masters. The adventures decided me never again to leave the limits of my prescribed stamping grounds until I was ready to venture forth for good and all, as it would certainly result in a curtailment of my liberties, as well as the probable death of Woola, we were to be discovered. On regaining the plaza, I had my third glimpse of the captive girl. She was standing with her guards before the entrance to the audience chamber, and as I approached, she gave me one haughty glance and turned her back full upon me. The act was so womanly, so earthly womanly, that though it stung my pride, it also warmed my heart with a feeling of companionship. It was good to know that someone else on Mars beside myself had human instincts of a civilized order, even though the manifestation of them was so painful and mortifying. I had a green Martian woman desired to show dislike or contempt, she would, in all likelihood, have done it with a sword thrust or a movement of her trigger finger, but as their sentiments are at mostly Mostly atrophied, it would have required a serious injury to have aroused such passions in them. Sola, let me add, was an exception. I never saw her perform a cruel or uncouth act, or fail in uniform kindliness and good nature. She was indeed, as her fellow Martians had said of her, an atavism, a dear and precious reversion to the former type of loved and loving ancestor. Seeing that the prisoner seemed the center of attraction, I halted to view the proceedings. I had not long to wait before presently Lorquas Pommel and his retinue of chieftains approached the building and, signing the guards to follow with the prisoner, entered the audience chamber. Realizing that I was a somewhat favored character, and also convinced that the warriors did not know of my proficiency in their language, as I had pleaded with Sola to keep it a secret on the grounds that I did not wish to be forced to talk with the men until I had perfectly mastered the Martian tongue, I chanced an attempt to enter the audience chamber and listen to the proceedings. The council squatted upon the steps of the rotarium, while below them stood the prisoner and her two guards. I saw that one of the women was Sarcoja, and thus understood how she had been present at the hearing of the preceding day, the results of which she had reported to the occupants of our dormitory last night. Her attitude toward the captive was most harsh and brutal. When she held her, she sunk her rudimentary nails into her poor girl's flesh or twisted her arm in the most painful manner. When it was necessary to move from one spot to another, she either jerked her roughly or pushed her headlong before her. She seemed to be venting upon this poor defenseless creature all the hatred, cruelty, ferocity, and spite of her 900 years, backed by unguessable age of fierce and brutal ancestors. The other woman was less cruel because she was entirely indifferent. If the prisoner had been left to her alone, and fortunately she was at night, she would have received no harsh treatment, nor, by the same token, would she have received any attention at all. As Lorquas Pommel raised his eyes to address the prisoner, they fell on me, and he turned to Tarkis with a word and gesture of impatience. Tarkis made some reply which I could not catch, but which caused Lorquas Pommel to smile, after which they paid no further attention to me. "What is your name?" asked Lorquas Pommel, addressing the prisoner. "Deja Thoris, daughter of Morse Tarjak of Helium." "And the nature of your expedition?" he continued. "It was purely scientific research party sent out by my father's father, the Jedka of Helium, to rechart the air currents and to take atmospheric density tests," replied the fair prisoner in a low, well-modulated voice. "We were unprepared for battle," she continued, "as we were on a peaceful mission, as our banners and colors of our craft denoted. The work we were doing was much more in your interest as in ours, for you know full well that that were it not for our labors and the fruits of our scientific operation, there would not be enough air or water on Mars to support a single human life. For ages, we have maintained the air and water supply at practically the same point without an appreciable loss. And we've done this in the face of our brutal and ignorant interference of your green men. Oh, why will you not learn to live in amity with your fellows? You must you ever go on down the ages to your final extinction, but little above the plane of the dumb brutes that serve you? A people without written language, without art, without homes, without love. The victim of eons of horrible community idea. Owning everything in common, even in your women and children, has resulted in your owning nothing in common. You hate each other as you hate all else except yourselves. Come back to the ways of our common ancestors. Come back to the light of kindliness and fellowship. The way is open to you. You will find the hands of the red man stretched out to aid you. Together we may do still more to regenerate our dying planet. The granddaughter of the greatest and mightiest of the red Jedikas has asked you, will you come?" Lorquas Pommel and the warrior sat looking silently and intently at the young woman for several moments after she had ceased speaking. What was passing in their minds no man may know, but that they were moved, I truly believe, and if one man high among them had been strong enough to rise above the custom, that moment would have marked a new and mighty era for Mars. I saw Tarkis raised to speak, and on his face was such an expression as I had never seen upon the countenance of a green Martian warrior. It bespoke an inward and mighty battle with self, with hereditary and old age custom, and as he opened his mouth to speak, a look almost of benignity, of kindliness, momentarily lighted up his face in terrible countenance. What words of moment were to have fallen from his lips were never spoken, as just then the young warrior, evidently sensing a trend of thought among the older men, leapt down from the steps of the rhododrome and, striking the frail captive a powerful blow across the face which felled her upon the floor, placed his foot upon her prostrate form, and turning toward the assembled council, broke into peals of horrid, mirthless laughter. For an instant I thought Tars Tarkas would strike him dead, nor did the aspect of Lord Lorquas Pommel ague in any too favorable for the brute. But the mood passed, their old selves reasserted their ascendancy, and they smiled. It was portentous, however, that they did not laugh aloud, for the brute's act considered a side-splitting witticism according to the ethics which rule the green Martian humor. That I have taken moments to write down a part of what occurred as that blow fell does not signify that I remained inactive for any such length of time. I think I must have sensed something of what was coming, for I realize now that I was crouched as for a spring, and as I saw the blow aimed at her beautiful upturned pleading face, the errant hand descended, I was halfway across the hall. Scarcely had his hideous laugh rang out but once when I was upon him. The brute was 12 feet in height and armed to the teeth, but I believe that I could have encountered a whole roomful of terrific intensity at my rage. Springing upward, I struck him full in the face as I returned at my warning cry. And then, as he drew his short sword, I drew mine, and sprang up again upon his breast, hooking one leg over the butt of his pistol and grasping one of his huge tusks with my left hand, while I delivered a blow after blow upon his enormous chest. He could not use his short sword as an advantage because I was too close to him, nor could he draw his pistol, which he attempted to do in direct opposition to Martian custom, which says that you may not fight a fellow warrior in private combat with any other than the weapon with which you are attacked. In fact, he could do nothing but make a wild and futile attempt to dislodge me. With all this immense bulk, he was little if any stronger than I, and it was but a matter of a moment or two before he sank, bleeding and lifeless, to the floor. Dejah Thoris had raised herself upon one elbow and was watching the battle with wide, staring eyes. When I had regained my feet, I raised her in my arms and bore her to one of the benches at the side of the room. Again, no Martian interfered with me, and tearing a piece of silk from my cape, I endeavored to staunch the flow of blood from her nostrils. I was soon successful, as her injuries amounted to little more than an ordinary nosebleed, and when she could speak, she placed her hand upon my arm, looking into my eyes, and said, "Why did you do it? You who refused me even friendly recognition in the first hour of my peril, and now you risk your life and kill one of your companions for my sake? I cannot understand. What strange manner of man you are, that you consort with the green men, though your form is that of my race, while your color is a little darker than that of the white ape. Tell me, are you human, or are you more than human?" "It's a strange tale," I replied, "too long to attempt to tell you now, and one which I so much doubt the credibility of myself that I fear to hope that others will believe it. Suffice it, for the present, that I am your friend, and, so far as our captors will permit, your prospector and your servant." "Then you, too, are a prisoner? But why, then? Those arms and the regalia of the Thracian chief. What is your name? Where's your country?" "Yes, Dejah Thoris, I am too a prisoner. My name is John Carter, and I claim Virginia, one of the United States of America, Earth, as my home. But why I am permitted to wear arms I do not know, nor was I aware of my regalia was that of a chieftain." We were interrupted at this juncture by the approaching of one of the warriors, bearing arms, accoutrements, and ornaments, and in the flash one of her questions was answered and a puzzle cleared up for me. I saw that the body of my dead antagonist had been stripped and I read in the menacing yet respectful attitude of the warrior who had brought me these trophies of the kill in the same demeanor as that evidence of the other one who had brought me my original equipment. And now, for the first time, I realized that my blow on the occasion of my first battle in the audience chamber had resulted in the death of my adversary. The reason for the whole attitude displayed towards me was now apparent. I had won my spurs, so to speak, and in crude justice, which always marks Martian dealings, and which, among other things, has caused me to call her the planet of paradoxes, I was accorded the honors due to Conqueror, the trappings and the position of the man I killed. In truth, I was a Martian chieftain, and this I learned later was the cause of my great freedom and my toleration in the audience chamber. As I had turned to receive the dead warrior's shadows, I had noticed that Tars Tarkas and several others had pushed forward towards us, and the eyes of the former rested upon me in the most quizzical manner. Finally, he addressed me. You speak the tongue of the Barsoom quite readily for one who was deaf and dumb to us a few short days ago. Where did you learn it, John Carter? You yourself are responsible, Tars Tarkas, I replied, in that you furnished me with the instructedness and remarkable ability. I have to thank Sola for my learning. She has done well, he answered, but your education in other respects needs considerable polish. Do you know what your unprecedented telemetry would have cost you had you failed to kill either of your two chieftains whose medal you now wear? I presume that the one whom I had failed to kill would have killed me, I answered, smiling. Oh no, you're wrong. Only in the last extremity of self-defense would a Martian warrior kill a prisoner. We like to save them for other purposes, and his face bespoke possibilities that were not pleasant to dwell on. But one thing can save you now, he continued. Should you, in recognition of your remarkable valor, ferocity, and prowess, be considered by Tal Hujas as worthy of his service, you may be taken into the community and become a full-fledged Tharkian. Until we reach the headquarters of Tal Hujas, it is the will of Lorquist Pommel that you will be accorded the respect your acts have earned you. You will be treated by us as Tharkian chief. But you must not forget that every chief who ranks you is responsible for your safe delivery to our mighty and most ferocious leader. I am done. I hear you, Tars Tarkas, I answered. As you know, I am not of Barsoom. Your ways are not my ways, and I can only act in the future as I have in the past, in accordance with the dictates of my conscience, and guided by the standards of mine own people. If you will leave me alone, I will go in peace, but if not, let the individual Barsoomians with whom I must deal either respect my rights as a stranger among you, or take whatever consequences may befall. If one thing, let us be sure. Whatever may be your ultimate intentions toward this unfortunate young woman, whoever would offer her injury or insult in the future must figure on making a full accounting to me. I understand that you belittle all sentiments and generosity and kindliness, but I do not, and I can convince your most doughty warriors that these characteristics are not incompatible with the ability to fight. Ordinarily, I'm not given to long speeches, nor, even before, had I descended to bombast, but I had guessed at the keynote, which would strike the answering chord of the breasts of the Green Martian, nor was I wrong, for my harangue evidently deeply impressed them, and their attitude toward me thereafter was still further respectful. Tars Tarkas himself seemed pleased with my reply, but his only comment was more or less enigmatical. And I think I know Tal Hodges, Jeddak of Thark. I now turned my attention to Jaja Thoris, and assisting her to her feet, I turned with her toward the exit, ignoring her hovering guardian harpies as well as the inquiring glances of the chieftains. Was I not now a chieftain also? Well, then, I would assume the responsibilities of one. They did not molest us, and so Deja Thoris, Princess of Helium, and John Carter, Gentleman of Virginia, followed by the faithful Woola, passed through in utter silence from the audience chamber of Lorquas Pommel, Jed, among the Tharks of Barsoom. That was intense. What's up, everybody? Heavy D, how's it going? Carp Kingdom, always good to see you. Purple Moon. Heavy D, yo, what's up, Ghost Spencer? How's it going, fam? Appreciate that. $2 dono. It's good to see you, Heavy D. Zona, so romantic in the forest. Guys, you hear ghosts. Being what? The frijoles. Ooh, run. Nope, send me to Pluto. Wooloo and woo. I keep wanting to say wooloo. It's funny you say that. It's really good to see all of you. I appreciate you being here. Got 7 of you in here, ghosty readers. Yes, we are reading through John Carter of Mars. Loving the story. So me too. That was intense. I like when the little guy stands for what's right, even though he's not so little, because the gravity on Mars is much less, and it was explained early on that he is super strong. So one punch from him, as we noticed, can actually do some pretty impressive damage. See, we're about an hour in, making good time as we start chapter 11 with Deja Thoris. As we reached the open, the 2 female guards who had been detailed to watch over Deja Thoris hurried up and made as though to assume custody of her once more. The poor child shrank against me, and I felt her 2 little hands fold tightly over my arm. Waving the women away, I informed them that Sola would attend the captive hereafter, and I further warned Sarkoja that any more of her cruel intention bestowed upon Deja Thoris will result in Sarkoja's sudden and painful demise. My threat was unfortunate and resulted in more harm than good to Deja Thoris, for, as I learned later, men do not kill women upon Mars, nor women men. So Sarkoja merely gave us an ugly look and departed to hatch up the deviltries against us. I soon found Sola, and explained to her that I wished her to guard Deja Thoris, as she had guarded me, that I wished her to find other quarters where they would not be molested by Sarkoja, and I finally informed her that I myself would take up my quarters among the men. Sola glanced at the accoutrements, which were carried into my hand and slung across my shoulder. "You are a great chieftain now, John Carter," she said, "and I must do your bidding, though indeed I am glad to do it under any circumstance. The man whose medal you carry was young, but he was a great warrior, and had, by his promotions and kills, won his way close to the rank of Tars Tarkas, who, as you know, is second to Lorquas Pommel only. You are 11th. There are but 10 chieftains in this community who rank you in prowess." "And if I should kill Lorquas Pommel?" I asked. "You would be first, John Carter. But you may only win that honor by the will of the entire council that Lorquas Pommel meet you in combat, or should he attack you, you may kill him in self-defense and thus win first place." I laughed and changed the subject. I had no particular desire to kill Lorquas Pommel, and less to be jet among the Tharks. I accompanied Sola and Deja Thoris in a search for new quarters, which we found in a building nearer to the audience chambers and of far more pretentious architecture than other formidable habitation. We also found in this building real sleeping apartments with ancient beds of highly wrought metal swinging from enormous gold chains depending from the marble ceilings. The decoration of the walls was most elaborate, and unlike the frescoes of the other buildings I had examined, portrayed many human figures in the compositions. These were of people like myself, and of much lighter color than Deja Thoris. They were clad in graceful flowing robes, highly ornamented with medals and jewels, and their luxuriant hair was of beautiful golden and reddish bronze. The men were beardless, and only a few wore arms. The scene depicted, for the most part, a fair-skinned, fair-haired people at play. Deja Thoris clasped her hands with an exclamation of rapture as she glanced upon this magnificent work of art, wrought by the people long extinct, while Sola, on the other hand, apparently did not see them. We decided to use this room, on the second floor and overlooking the plaza, for Deja Thoris and Sola, and another room adjoining and in the rear for the cooking and supplies. I then dispatched Sola to bring the bedding and such food and utensils as she might need, telling her that I would guard Deja Thoris until she returned. As Sola departed, Deja Thoris turned to me with a faint smile. And where to, then, would your prisoner escape should you leave her, unless it was to follow you and crave your protection and ask your pardon for the cruel thoughts she has harbored against you these past few days? You are right, I answered. There is no escape for either of us unless we go together. I heard your challenge to the creature you call Tars Tarkas, and I think I understand your position among these people, but what I cannot fathom is your statement that you are not of Barsoom. In the name of my first ancestor, then, she continued, where may you be from? You are like unto my people, and yet so unalike. You speak my language, and yet I heard you tell Tars Tarkas that you had but learned it recently. All Barsoomians speak the same tongue from the ice-clad south to the ice-clad north, only their written languages differ. Only in the valley door, where the river East empties into the lost sea of Chorus, is there supposed to be a different language spoken. And, except in the legends of our ancestors, there is no record of Barsoomian returning up the river East from the shores of Karos and in the valley of Dor. Do not tell me that you have thus returned. They would kill you horribly anywhere upon the surface of Barsoom if that were true. Tell me it's not. Her eyes were filled with a strange, weird light. Her voice was pleading, and her little hands reached up upon my breast, were pressed against me as though to wring a denial from my very heart. I do not know your customs, Deja Thoris, but in my own Virginia a gentleman does not lie to save himself. I am not of Dor. I have never seen the mysterious East. The lost sea of Chorus is still lost, so far as I'm concerned. Do you believe me? And then it struck me, suddenly, that I was very anxious that she should believe me. It was not that I feared the results which would follow a general belief that I had returned from the Barsoomian heaven or hell or whatever it was. Why was it then? Why should I care what she thought? I looked down at her, her beautiful face upturned, and her wonderful eyes opening up with the very depth of her soul, and as my eyes met hers, I knew why, and I shuddered. A similar wave of feeling seemed to stir her. She drew away from me with a sigh, and her earnest, beautiful face turned up to mine. She whispered, I believe you, John Carter. I do not know what a gentleman is, nor have I ever heard before of Virginia. But on Barsoom no man lies. If he does not wish to speak the truth, he is silent. Where is this Virginia, your country, John Carter? She asked me, and it seemed as this fair name of my fair land had never sounded more beautiful than as it fell from those perfect lips on that foregone day. I am of another world, I answered. The great planet Earth, which revolves around our common sun, the next within the orbit of your Barsoom, which we know as Mars. How I came here I cannot tell you, for I do not know. But here I am, and since my presence has permitted me to serve Deja Thoris, I am glad that I am here. She gazed at me with troubled eyes, longing questioningly. That it was difficult to believe my statement, I well know, nor could I hope that she could do however much I craved her confidence and respect. I would much rather not have told her anything of my ascendance. But no man could look in the depths of those eyes and refuse her slightest behest. Finally, she smiled, and rising, said, I shall have to believe even though I cannot understand. I can readily perceive that you are not of Barsoom today. You are like us, yet different. But why should I trouble my poor head with such a problem when my heart tells me that I believe because I wish to believe? It was good logic, good, earthly, feminine logic, and if it satisfied her, I certainly could pick no flaws in it. As a matter of fact, it was about the only kind of logic that could be brought to bear upon my problem. We fell into a general conversation then, asking and answering many questions on each side. She was curious to learn of the customs of my people and displayed a remarkable knowledge of events on earth. When I questioned her closely on this seemingly familiarity with earthly things, she laughed and cried out, Why, every schoolboy on Barsoom knows the geography and much concerning the fauna and flora, as well as the history of your planet, fully as well as its own. Can we not see everything which takes place upon earth, as you call it? Is it not hanging there in the heavens in plain sight? This baffled me, I must confess, fully as much as my statements have confounded her, and I told her so. Then I explained in general the instruments her people had used had been perfecting for ages, which permit them to throw upon a screen a perfect image of that which is transpiring upon any planet and upon many of the stars. These pictures are so perfect in detail, when photographed and enlarged, objects no greater than a blade of grass may be distinctly recognized. I afterward, in helium, saw many of these pictures, as well as the instruments which produced them. If, then, you are so familiar with earthly things, I asked, why is it that you do not recognize me as identical with the inhabitants of this planet? She smiled again, as one might in bored indulgence of a questioning child. Because, John Carter, she replied, nearly every planet and star having atmospheric conditions at all approaching those of Barsoom shows forms of animal life almost identical with you and me and further Earthmen. Almost without exception, cover their bodies with strange, unsightly pieces of cloth and their heads with hideous contraptions, the purpose of which we have been unable to conceive, while you, when found by the Thracian warriors, were entirely unfigured and unadorned. The fact that you wore no ornaments is a strong proof of your un-Barsoomian origin, while the absence of grotesque coverings might cause a doubt as to your earthliness. I then narrated the details of my departure from Earth, explaining that my body there lay fully clothed in all the, to her, strange garments of mundane dwellers. At this point, Sola returned with our meager belongings and her young Martian protege, who, of course, would have to share the quarters with them. Sola asked us if we had a visitor during her absence, and seemed much surprised when we answered in the negative. It seemed that she had mounted the approach to the upper floors where our quarters were located. She had met Sarkoja descending. I decided that she must have been eavesdropping, but as we could recall nothing of importance that had passed between us, we dismissed the matter as of little consequence, merely promising ourselves to be warned to the utmost caution in the future. Deja Thoris and I then fell to examining the architecture and decorations of the beautiful chambers of the building we were occupying. She told me that these people had presumably flourished over 100,000 years before. They were the eagerly progenitors of her race, but had mixed with the other great race of early Martians who were very dark, almost black, and also with a reddish-yellow face and had flourished at the same time. These three great divisions of the higher Martians had been forced into a mighty alliance, as the drying up of the Martian seas had compelled them to seek the comparatively few and always diminishing fertile areas, and to defend themselves under new conditions of life against the wild hordes of green men. Ages of close relationship and intermarrying had resulted in the race of red men, of which Deja Thoris was a fair and beautiful daughter. During the ages of hardships and incessant warring between their own various races, as well as with the green men, and before they had fitted themselves to the changed conditions, much of the high civilization and many of the arts of the fair-haired Martians had become lost. But the red race of today had reached the point where it feels that it has made up new discoveries, and in a more practical civilization for all that lies irretrievably buried with the ancient Barsoomians beneath the countless intervening ages. These ancient Martians had been a highly cultivated and literary race, but during the vicissitudes of those trying centuries of readjustment to new conditions, not only did their advancement and production cease entirely, but practically all of their archives, records, and literature were lost. Deja Thoris related many interesting facts and legends concerning this lost race of noble and kindly people. She said that the city in which we were camping was supposed to have been the center of commerce and culture known as Korid. It had been built upon a beautiful natural harbor, landlocked by magnificent hills. The little valley on the west front of the city, she explained, was all that remained of the harbor, while the pass through the hills to the old sea bottom had been the channel through which the shipping passed up the city's gates. The shores of the ancient seas were dotted with just such cities, and lesser ones in diminishing numbers. were to be found converging toward the center of the oceans, as the people had found it necessary to follow the receding waters until necessity had forced upon them their ultimate salvation, the so-called Martian canals. We had been so engrossed in exploration of the building and in our conversation that it was late in the afternoon before we realized it. We were brought back to the realization of our present conditions by a messenger bearing a summons from Lorquas Pommel, directing me to appear before him forthwith. Bidding Deja Thors and Sola farewell, and commanding Woola to remain on guard, I hastened to the audience chamber, where I found Lorquas Pommel and Tars Tarkas seated upon the rostrum. Hey, what's going on, Knickers? It is good to see you. Appreciate you popping in for story time. I did want to say, um, yeah, if possible, are you going to be able to drop by my stream on Thursday? Because I have something I want to show you. Just if possible. If you're going to be busy on Thursday, I'll see what I can do. But I appreciate you being here, Knickers. As we have chapter 12, 13, and 14 to read. Same bat time. So right around 9:30 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, right around the same time. Excellent. Awesome. That makes me happy. Awesome. Thank you. Looking forward to it. All right. Let's get into chapter 12. As I entered and saluted, Lorquas Pommel signaled me to advance, and fixing his great hideous eyes upon me, addressed me thus. You have been with us a few days, yet during that time you have by your prowess won a high position among us. Be that as it may, you are not one of us. You owe us no allegiance. Your position is a particular one, he continued. You are a prisoner, and yet you give commands which must be obeyed. You are an alien, and yet you are Tharkian chief. You are a midget, and yet you can kill a mighty warrior with one blow of your fist. And now you are reported to have been plotting to escape with another prisoner of another race. A prisoner, from her own admission, half believes you are returned from the Valley of Dor. Either one of these accusations, if proved, would be sufficient grounds for your execution. But we are just people, and you shall have a trial on your return to Thark, if Talhaja so commands. But, he continued, in his fierce guttural tones, if you run off with the red girl, it is I who shall have to account to Talhajas. It is I who shall have to face Taj Tarkas, and either demonstrate my right to command, or the metal from my dead carcass will go to a better man, for such is the custom of the Tharks. I have no quarrel with Tars Tarkas. Together we rule supreme, the greatest of the lesser communities among the green men. We do not wish to fight between ourselves, and so if you were dead, John Carter, I should be glad. Under two conditions only, however, may you be killed by us without orders from Talhajas. In personal combat and self-defense, should you attack one of us, or were you apprehended in an attempt to escape. As a matter of justice, I must warn you that we only await one of these two excuses for ridding ourselves of so great a responsibility. A safe delivery of the Red Girl to Talhajas is of the great importance. Not in 1,000 years have the Tharks made such a capture. She is the granddaughter of the greatest of the Red Jedaks, who is also our bitterest enemy. I have spoken. The Red Girl told us that we were without the softer sentiments of humanity, but we are just and truthful race. You may go. Turning, I left the audience chamber, so this was the beginning of Sarkoja's persecution. I knew that none other could be responsible for this report, which had reached the ears of Lorquas Pommel so quickly, and now I recalled those portions of our conversation which had touched upon escape and upon my origin. Sarkoja, was at the time Tarkis' oldest and most trusted female. As such, she was a mighty power behind the throne, for no warrior had the confidence of Lorquas Pommel to such an extent as did his ablest lieutenant, Tarkis. However, instead of putting thoughts of possibilities escaped from my mind, my audience with Lorquas Pommel only served to center my every faculty on the subject. Now, more than before, the absolute necessity for escape, insofar as Deja Thoris was concerned, was impressed upon me, for I was convinced that some horrible fate awaited her at the headquarters of Tal Hodges. As described by Sola, this monster was the exaggerated personification of all the ages of cruelty, ferocity, and brutality from which he had descended. Cold, cunning, calculating, he was also, in marked contrast to most of his fellows, a slave to that brute passion which the warning demands for procreation upon their dying planet, as almost stilled in the Martian breast. The thought that the divine Deja Thoris might fall to the clutches of such an abysmal atavism started a cold sweat upon me. Far better that we save friendly bullets for ourselves in the last moment, as did those brave frontier women of my lost land, who took their lives rather than fall into the hands of the Indian braves. As I wandered about the plaza, lost in the gloomy forebodings, Tarkis approached me on his way to the audience chamber. His demeanor towards me was unchanged, and he greeted me as though he had not just parted a few moments before. "Where are your quarters, John Carter?" he asked. "I have selected none," I replied. "It seems best that I quartered either by myself or among the other warriors, and I was awaiting an opportunity to ask your advice, as you know," and I smiled. "I am not familiar with all the customs of the Tharks." "Come with me," he directed, and together we moved off across the plaza to a building which I was glad to see adjoining that occupied by Sola and her charges. "My quarters are on the first floor of this building," he said, "and the second floor is also fully occupied by warriors, but the third floor and the floors above are vacant. You may take your choice of these." "I understand," he continued, "that you have given up women to the Red Prisoner. Given up your woman to the Red Prisoner. Well, as you have said, your ways are not our ways, but you can fight well enough to do about as you please, and so, if you wish to give your woman to a captive, it is your own affair. But as a chieftain, you should have those serve you, and in accordance with our customs, you may select any or all females from the retinues of the chieftains whose medal you now wear." I thanked him, but assured him that I could get along very nicely without assistance, except in the matter of preparing food, and so he promised to send women to me for this purpose, and also for the care of my arms and the manufacture of my ammunition, which he said would be necessary. I suggested that they might also bring some of the sleeping silks and furs which belonged to me as spoils of combat, for the nights were cold and I had none of my own. He promised to do so, and he departed. Left alone, I ascended the winding corridor to the upper floors in search of a suitable quarters. The beauties of the other buildings were repeated in this, and, as usual, I was lost soon in a tour of investigation and discovery. I finally chose a front room on the third floor because this brought me nearest to Deja Thoris, whose apartment was on the second floor of the adjoining building, and it flashed upon me that I could rig up some means of communication whereby she might signal me in case she needed either my services or my protection. Adjoining my sleeping apartment were baths, dressing rooms, and other sleeping and living apartments. In all, some 10 rooms on this floor. The windows of the back rooms overlooked the enormous court, which formed the center of the square made by the buildings which faced the four contiguous streets, and which was now given over the quartering of various animals belonging to the warriors occupying the adjoining buildings. While the court was entirely overgrown with the yellow moss-like vegetation which blankets practically the entire surface of Mars, yet numerous fountain statuary benches, pergola-like contraptions bore witness to the beauty which the court must have presented in bygone times, when graced by the fair-haired laughing people whom stern and unalterable cosmic laws had driven not only from their homes, but from all except the vague legends of their descendants. One could easily picture the gorgeous foliage of the luxuriant Martian vegetation which once filled this scene with life and color, the graceful figures of the beautiful women, the straight and handsome men, The happy, frolicking children, all sunlit, happiness and peace. It was difficult to realize that they had gone, down through the ages of darkness, cruelty and ignorance, until their hereditary instincts of culture and humanitarianism had risen ascendant once more in the final composite race, which now is dominion, which is now dominant upon Mars. My thoughts were cut short by an advent of several young females bearing loads of weapons, silks, furs, jewels, cooking utensils, and casks of food and drink, including considerable loot from the aircraft. All this, it seemed, had been in property of the two chieftains I had slain, and now, by the custom of the Tharks, it had become mine. At my direction, they placed the stuff in one of the back rooms, and then departed, only to return with a second load, which they advised me constituted the balance of my goods. On this second trip, they were accompanied by 10 or 15 other women and youths who, it seemed, formed the retinues of the two chieftains. They were not their families, nor their wives, nor their servants. Their relationship was peculiar, and so unlike anything known to us that it was most difficult to describe. All property among the Green Martians is owned in common by the community, except the personal weapons, ornaments, and sleeping silks and furs of the individuals. These alone can one claim undisputed right to, nor may he accumulate more of these than are required for his actual need. The surplus he holds merely a custodian, and it's passed on to the younger members of the community as necessity demands. The women and children of the men's retinue may be likened to the military unit, for which he is responsible in various ways, as in matters of instruction, discipline, sustenance, and the exigencies of the continual roamings and their unending strife with other communities and with the Red Martians. His women are in no sense wives. The Green Martian use no word corresponding in meaning with this earthly word. Their mating is a matter of community interest solely, and is directed without reference to natural selection. The Council of Chieftains of each community control the matter as surely as the owner of a Kentucky racing stud directs the scientific breeding of a stock for an improvement of the whole. In theory, it may sound well, as is often the case with theories, but the results of ages of this unnatural process, coupled with the community interest in the offspring being held paramount to that of the mother, is shown in the cold, cruel creatures and their gloomy, loveless, mirthless existence. It is true the Green Martians are absolutely virtuous, both men and women, with the exception of such degenerates as Tal Hodges, but better far in finer balance of human characteristics, even in the expanse of the slight and occasional loss of chastity. Finding that I must assume responsibility for these creatures, whether I would or not, I made the best of it and directed them to find quarters on the upper floors, leaving the third floor to me. One of the girls I charged with the duties of my simple cuisine and directed the others to take up the various activities which had formerly constituted their vocations. Thereafter, I saw little of them, nor did I care to. Oh, goodness. Have a very, oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I certainly do love reading, and I do know that a lot of people come in to fall asleep. So, hey, what's going on, Alice? Hope you're doing well. Yes, I love speaking. Is one thing that I've grown very fond of over the past 20 years. And the skill to read and don't sound like you're reading is something that I'm washing dishes, says Alec. I can see why. I appreciate that, and I hope sometimes I'll listen to my own reading streams because I realize that even my own voice kind of puts me to sleep. But not the voice I hear, because that's a different tone. But when I'm like editing my videos and stuff, talking, I'm just like nodding off, like, why am I so sleepy? All right, we're about to get spicy, y'all. So I hope you're ready. I was not expecting a chapter like this, but we're gonna start chapter 13, which is simply called Love Making on Mars. Yeah. we're just going to take a breath before we get all spicy. And let's hope we can keep this still a PG stream. Just saying. And it's chapter 13. Lovemaking on Mars. Following the battle with the airships, the community remained within the city for several days, abandoning the homeward march until they could feel reasonably assured that the ships would not return. For to be caught on the open plains with a cavalcade of chariots and children was far from the desire even so warlike people as the Green Martians. During our period of inactivity, Tars Tarkas had instructed me in many ways and customs in the art of war familiar to the Tharks, including lessons in riding and guiding the great beasts which bore the warriors. These creatures, which are known as thoats, are as dangerous and vicious as their masters, but when once subdued, are sufficiently tractable for a purpose of the Green Martians. 2 of these animals had fallen to me from the warriors whose metal I wore. In a short time, I could handle them quite as well as the native warriors. The method was not at all complicated. If the thoats did not respond with sufficient celerity to the telepathic instructions of their riders, they were dealt a terrific blow between the ears with the butt of a pistol, and if they showed fight, as treatment was continued until the brutes either were subdued or had unseated their riders. In the latter case, it became a life-and-death struggle between the men and the beast. If the former were quick enough with this pistol, he might live to ride again, though upon some other beast. If not, his torn and mangled body was gathered up by his women and buried in accordance with Archean custom. My experience with Wula determined me to attempt the experiment of kindness in my treatment of the thoats. First, I taught them that they could not unseat me, and even rapped them sharply between the ears to impress upon them my authority and mastery. Then, by degrees, I won their confidence in much the same manner as I adopted countless times with many mundane mounts. I was ever a good hand with animals, but by inclination, as well as because it brought more lasting and satisfactory results, I was always kind and humane in my dealings with the lower orders. I could take a human life, if necessary, with far less compunction than that of a poor, unreasoning, irresponsible brute. In the course of a few days, my thoats were the wonder of my entire community. They would follow me like dogs, rubbing their great snouts against my body in awkward evidence of affection, and they responded to every command with an alacrity and docility which caused the Martian warriors to ascribe to me the possession of some earthly power unknown on Mars. "How have you bewitched them?" asked Tars Tarkas one afternoon, when he had seen me run my arm far between the great jaws of one of the thoats, which had wedged a piece of stone between 2 of his teeth, while feeding upon the moss-like vegetation within our courtyard. "Oh, by kindness," I replied. "You see, Tars Tarkas, the softer sentiments have their value, even to a warrior. In the height of battle, as well as upon the march, I know that my thoats will obey my every command, and therefore my fighting efficiency is enhanced. And I am a better warrior for that reason, that I am a kind master. Your other warriors would find to an advantage themselves, as well as to the community, to adopt my methods in this respect. Only a few days since you yourself told me that these great brutes, by the uncertainty of their tempers, often were the means of turning victory into defeat, since at a crucial moment they might elect to unseat and rend their riders." "Show me how you accomplish these results," was Tars Tarkas' only rejoinder. And so I explained as carefully as I could the entire method of my training, and I had adopted with my beasts the latter he had me repeat before Lorquas Pommel and the assembled warriors. The moment marked the beginning of a new existence for the poor thoats, and before I left the community of Lorquas Pommel, I had the satisfaction of observing a regiment as tractable and docile mounts as one might care to see. The effect on the procession of celerity of the military movements was so remarkable that Lorquas Pommel presented me with a massive anklet of gold from his own leg, as a sign of his appreciation of my service to the Horde. On the seventh day following the battle with the aircraft, we again took up the march towards Thark, all probability of another attack being deemed remote by Lorquas Pommel. During the days just preceding our departure, I had seen but little of Dejah Thoris, as I had been kept very busy by Tars Tarkas with my lessons in the art of Martian warfare, as well as in the training of my thoats. The few times I had visited her quarters, she had been absent, walking upon the streets with Sola, or investigating the buildings in the near vicinity of the plaza. I had warned them against venturing far from the plaza, for fear of the great white apes, whose ferocity I was only too well acquainted with. However, since Woola accompanied them on all their excursions, and as Sola was well armed, there was comparatively little cause for fear. On the evening before our departure, I saw them approaching along one of the great avenues which led into the plaza from the east. I advanced to meet them, and telling Sola that I would take responsibility for Dejah Thoris's safekeeping, I directed her to return to her quarters on some trivial errand. I liked and trusted Sola, but for some reason I desired to be alone with Dejah Thoris, who represented to me all that I had left behind on Earth in agreeable and congenial companionship. There seemed bonds of mutual interest between us, as powerful as though we had been born under the same roof rather than upon different planets, hurtling through space some 48 million miles apart. That she shared my sentiments in this respect I was positive, for on my approach the look of pitiful hopelessness left her sweet countenance to be replaced by a smile of joyful welcome, as she placed her right hand upon my left shoulder in true red Martian salute. Sarkoja told Sola that you had become a true Thark, she said, and that I would now see no more of you than any other warrior. Sarkoja is a liar of the first magnitude, I replied, notwithstanding the proud claim of the Tharkis to absolute verity. Dejah Thoris laughed. I knew that even though you became a member of the community, you would not cease to be my friend. A warrior may change his metal, but not his heart, as the saying is upon Barsoom. I think they have been trying to keep us apart, she continued, for whenever you have been off duty, one of the other women of Tars Tarkas' retinue has always arranged to trump up some excuse to get Sola and me out of sight. They have had me down in the pits below the building, helping them mix their awful radium powder and make their terrible projectiles. You know that these have to be manufactured by artificial light, as exposure to sunlight always results in explosion. You have noticed that their bullets explode when they strike an object, while the opaque outer coating is broken by the impact, exposing a glass cylinder almost solid, and the forward end of which the minute particle of radium powder, the moment the sunlight, even though diffused, strikes this powder, it explodes with a violence which nothing can withstand. If you ever witness a night battle, you will note the absence of these explosions, while the morning following the battle will be filled at sunrise with the sharp detonations of exploding missiles fired at the preceding night. As a rule, however, non-exploding projectiles are used at night. I had used the word radium in describing this powder because, in the light of recent discoveries on Earth, I believe it to be a mixture of which radium is based. In Captain Carter's manuscript, it is mentioned always by the name used in the written language of helium and is spelled in hieroglyphics, which it would be difficult and useless to reproduce. While I was much interested in Dejah Thoris's explanation of this wonderful adjunct to the Martian warfare, I was more concerned by the immediate problem of their treatment of her. That they were keeping her away from me was not a matter for surprise, but that they should subject her to dangerous and arduous labor filled me with rage. Have they ever subjected you to cruelty and ignominy, Dejah Thoris? I asked, feeling hot blood of my fighting ancestors leap into my veins as I awaited her reply. Only in little ways, John Carter, she answered. Nothing that can harm me outside my pride. They know that I am the daughter of 10,000 Jedoks, and the trace of my ancestry straight back without a break to the builder of the first great waterway. And they, who do not even know their own mothers, are jealous of me. At heart, they hate their horrid fates, and so wreak their poor spite on me, who stand for everything they have not. And for they all and for all they most crave and never can attain. Let us pity them, my chieftain, for even though we die at their hands, we can afford them pity, since we are greater than they, and they know it. Had I known the significance of those words, my chieftain, as applied by the red Martian woman to a man, I should have had the surprise of my life. But I did not know at that time, nor for many months thereafter. Yes, I still had much to learn upon Barsoom. I presume it is better part of wisdom that we bow to our fates with as good grace as possible, Deja Thoris. But I hope, nevertheless, that I may be present in the next time any Martian green, red, pink, or violet has the temerity to even so much as frown upon you, my princess. Deja Thoris caught her breath at my last words and gazed upon me with the dilated eyes and quickening breath. And then, with an odd little laugh which brought roguish dimples to the corners of her mouth, she shook her head and cried, "What a child, a great warrior, and yet stumbling little child." "What have I done now?" I asked in sore perplexity. "Some day you shall know, John Carter. If we live, I may not tell you. And I, the daughter of Morse Carjack, son of Thardos Morse, have listened without anger," she soliloquized in conclusion. Then she broke out again in one of her gay, happy, laughing moods, joking with me on the prowess as a Thark warrior, as contrasted with my soft heart and natural kindliness. I presume that should you accidentally wound an enemy, you would take him home and nurse him back to health." She laughed. "That is precisely what we do on Earth," I answered, "at least among civilized men." This made her laugh again. She could not understand it, for, with all her tenderness and womanly sweetness, she was still a Martian, and to a Martian the only good enemy is a dead enemy. For every dead foreman means so much more to a divide between those who live. I was very curious to know what I had said or done to cause her so much perturbation a moment before, and so I continued to importune her to enlighten me. "No," she exclaimed, "it is enough that you have said it and that I have listened. And when you learn, John Carter, if if I be dead, as likely as be ere my further moon has circled Barsoom another 12 times, remember that I listened and that I smiled." It was all Greek to me, but the more I begged her to explain, the more positive became her denials of my request, and so, in very hopelessness, I desisted. Words are running together. Sorry, y'all. Appreciate your patience. Day had now given way to night, and as we wandered along the great avenue lighted by the two moons of Barsoom, and with Earth looking down upon us out of her luminous green eye, it seemed that we were alone in the universe, and I, at least, was content that it should be so. The chill of the Martian night was upon us, and removing my silks, I threw them across the shoulders of Deja Thoris. As my arm rested for a moment and an instant upon her, I felt a thrill pass through every fiber of my being, such as contact with no other mortal had ever been produced. And it seemed to me that she had leaned slightly towards me, but of that I was not sure. Only I knew that my arm rested there across her shoulders longer than the act of adjusting the silk required, and she did not draw away. Nor did she speak, and so in silence we walked the surface of the dying world. But in the breast of one of us at least had been born that which is ever oldest yet ever new. I loved Deja Thoris. The touch of my arm upon her naked shoulder and had spoken to me in words I would not mistaken. And I knew that I loved her since the first moment that my eyes had met hers, that first time in the plaza in the dead city of Querad. Whew. Well, it seemed that would be more implied. Chapter 19 gets real spicy. Brown chicken, brown cow. Aloud, Leighton has changed to music, writing to finish off his songs. No worries. I appreciate that, Katrina. That didn't get as spicy as I thought it was going to. It was getting real close there at the end. Hey, Claire C., how's it going? I hope you're doing well tonight. We are just making great time. We have about another 20 minutes left and one more chapter to read. I'm digging the dialogue in the book. but I too am curious about what he said and why it mattered. I appreciate you all being here. Got 9 of you ghosty readers hanging out while we finish up this last chapter of the read tonight. And then next week we will read chapter 22. I'm sorry, chapter 15 through 21. I'll do all the series. Yeah, I'll do the whole series. All right. Chapter 14. Ooh, how quickly that changed. A duel to the death. My first impulse was to tell her of my love, and then I thought of the helplessness of her position wherein I alone could lighten the burdens of her captivity and protect her in my poor way against the thousands of hereditary enemies she must face upon our arrival to Thark. I could not chance causing her additional pain or sorrow by declaring a love which, in all probability, she did not return. Should I be so indiscreet, her position would be even more unbearable than now, and the thought that she might feel that I was taking advantage of her helplessness to influence her decision was the final argument which sealed my lips. "Why are you so quiet, Dejathoris?" I asked. "Possibly you would rather return to Sola and your quarters?" "No," she murmured. "I am happy here. I do not know why it is that I should always be happy and contented when you, John Carter, a stranger, are with me. Yet at such times it seems that I am safe, and that with you, I shall soon return to my father's court and feel his strong arms around me and my mother's tears and kisses on my cheek." "Do people kiss, then, on Barsoom?" I asked, when she had explained the word she used, in answer to my inquiry as to its meaning. "Parents, brothers, and sisters, yes, and," she added in a low, thoughtful tone, "lovers." "And you, Dejathoris, have parents and brothers and sisters?" "Yes." "And a lover?" She was silent, nor could I venture to repeat the question. "The man of Barsoom," she finally ventured, "does not ask personal questions of women, except his mother, and the women he has fought for and won." "But I have fought," I started, and then I wished my tongue had been cut from my mouth, for she turned even as I caught myself and ceased, and drawing my silks from her shoulder she held them out to me, and without a word, and with a head held high, she moved with the carriage of a queen. She was the queen she was toward the plaza and the doorway of her quarters. I did not attempt to follow her, other than to see that she reached the building in safety, but directing Wula to accompany her, I turned disconsolately and entered my own house. I sat for hours, cross-legged and cross-tempered, upon my silks, meditating upon the queer freak's chance play upon us poor devils of mortals. So, this was love. I had escaped it for all these years, and I had roamed the 5 continents and their encircling seas in spite of beautiful women and urging opportunity, in spite of a half desire of love and a constant search for my ideal. It had remained for me to fall furiously and hopelessly in love with a creature from another world, of a species similar, possibly, yet not identical with mine. A woman who was hatched from an egg and whose span of life might cover 1,000 years, whose people had strange customs and ideas. A woman whose hopes, whose pleasures, whose standards of virtue and right and wrong might vary as greatly from mine as did those of the Green Martians. Yes, I was a fool, but I was in love. And though I was suffering the greatest misery I had ever known, I would not have had it otherwise for all the riches of Barsoom. Such is love, and such are lovers wherever love is known. To me, Dejathoris was all that was perfect, all that was virtuous and beautiful and noble and good. I believe that from the bottom of my heart, from the depths of my soul, on that night in Korid, as I sat cross-legged upon my silks, while the nearest moon of Barsoom raced through the western sky toward the horizon, and lighted up the gold and marble and jeweled mosaics of my world-old chamber. And I believe it today as I sit at my desk in this little study overlooking the Hudson. 20 years have intervened. For 10 of them I lived and fought for Dejathoris and her people, and for 10 I have lived upon her memory. The morning of our departure for Thark drawed cleared and hot, as do all Martian mornings, except for the 6 weeks when the snow melts at the poles. I sought out Dejah Thoris in the throng of departing chariots, but she turned her shoulder to me, and I could see the red blood mount to her cheek. With the foolish inconsistency of love, I held my peace, when I might have pled ignorance of the nature of my offense, or at least the gravity of it, and so have effected at worst a half consolation. I sought out Dejah Thoris in the throng of departing chariots. My duty dictated that I must see that she was comfortable, and so I glanced into her chariot and rearranged her silks and furs. And doing so, I noted with horror that she was heavily chained by one ankle to the side of the vehicle. "What does this mean?" I cried, turning to Sola. "Sarkoja thought it best," she answered, her face betokening her disapproval of the procedure. Examining the manacles, I saw that they were fastened with a massive spring lock. "Where's the key, Sola? Let me have it." "Sarkoja wears it, John Carter," she answered. I turned without further word and sought out Tars Tarkas, to whom I vehemently objected to the unnecessary humiliations and cruelties, as they seemed to my lover's eyes, that they were being heaped upon Dejah Thoris. "John Carter," he answered, "if ever you and Dejah Thoris escape the Tharks, it will be upon this journey. We know that you will not go without her. You have shown yourself a mighty fighter, and we do not wish to manacle you. So we hold you both in the easiest way that will yet ensure insecurity. Will ensure security. I have spoken." I saw the strength of his reasoning at a flash, and I knew that it was futile to appeal from his decision. But I asked that the key be taken from Sarkoja, and that she be directed to leave the prisoner alone in the future. "This much, Tars Tarkas, you may do for me in return for the friendship that I must confess, I feel for you." "Friendship?" he replied. "There is no such thing, John Carter. But have your will. I shall direct that Sarkoja cease to annoy the girl, and I myself will take custody of the key." "Unless you wish me to assume responsibility," I said, smiling, and he looked at me long and earnestly before he spoke. "Were you to give me your word that neither you nor Dejah Thoris would attempt to escape until after we have safely reached the court of Talhajas, you might have the key and throw the chains into the river East." "It were better that you held the key, Tars Tarkas," I replied, and he smiled and said no more. But that night, as we were making camp, I saw myself unfasten Dejah Thoris's fetters, himself. With all his cruel ferocity and coldness, there was an undercurrent of something in Tars Tarkas which he seemed ever battling, subdue. Could it be a vestige of some human instinct come back from an ancient forebear to haunt him with the horror of his people's ways? As I was approaching Dejah Thoris's chariot, I passed Sarkoja, and the black venomous look she accorded me was the sweetest balm I had felt for many hours. Lord, how she hated me, bristled from her so palpably that one might almost have cut it with a sword. A few moments later, I saw her deep in conversation with a warrior named Zod, a big, hulking, powerful brute, but one who had never made a kill among his own chieftains, and so was still as an Omad or man with one name. He could win a second name only with the medal of some chieftain. It was this custom which entitled me to the names of either the chieftains I had killed. In fact, some of the warriors addressed me as Dotar Sojat, a combination of the surnames of the two warrior chieftains whose medal I had taken, or, in other words, whom I had slain in a fair fight. As Sarkoja talked with Zod, he cast occasional glances in my direction, while she seemed to be urging him very strongly to some action. I paid little attention to it at the time, but the next day I had a good reason to recall the circumstances, and at the same time gain a slight insight into the depths of Sarkoja's hatred and the lengths to which she was capable of going to wreak her horrible vengeance on me. Dejah Thoris would have none of me again on this evening, and though I spoke her name, she neither replied nor conceded by so much as a flutter of an eyelid that she realized my existence. In my extremity, I did what most other lovers would have done. I sought word from her through an intimate. I sought word from her through an intimate. In this instance, it was Sola whom I intercepted with another part of camp. What is the matter with Dejah Thoris? I blurted out at her. Why will she not speak to me? Sola seemed puzzled herself, as though such strange actions on the part of two humans were quite beyond her, as indeed they were, poor child. She says you have angered her, and that is all she will say, except that she is the daughter of a Jed and the granddaughter of a Jeddak, and she has been humiliated by a creature who could not polish the teeth of her grandmother Sorik. I pondered over this report with some time, finally asking, what might a Sorik be, Sola? It's a little animal about as big as my hand, which the red Martian women keep to play with, explained Sola. Not fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat? I must rank pretty low in consideration of Dejah Thoris, I thought, but I could not help laughing at the strange figure of speech. So homely, and in this respect so earthly, it made me homesick, for it sounded very much like not fit to polish her shoes. And then commenced a train of thought quite new to me. I began to wonder what my people at home were doing. I had not seen them for years. There was a family of Carters in Virginia who claimed close relationship with me. I was supposed to be a great uncle or something of the kind, equally foolish. I could pass anywhere for 25 to 30 years of age, and to be a great uncle always seemed the height of incongruity, for my thoughts and feelings were those of a boy. There were two little kiddies in the Carter family whom I had loved and whom had thought there were no one on earth like Uncle Jack. I could see them just as plainly as I stood there under the moonlight skies of Barsoom, and I longed for them as I had never longed for any mortals before. By nature, a wanderer, I had never known the true meaning of the word home, but the great hall of the Carters had always stood for all that the word did mean to me. And now my heart turned towards it from the cold and unfriendly peoples I had been thrown amongst. For did not even Dejah Thoris despise me? I was a low creature, so low, in fact, that I was not even fit to polish the teeth of her grandmother's cat. And then my saving sense of humor came to my rescue, and laughing, I turned into my silks and furs and slept upon the moon-haunted ground, the sleep of a tired and healthy fighting man. We broke camp the next day at an early hour and marched, with only a single halt, until just before dark. Two incidents broke the tediousness of the march. About noon, we espied, far to our right, what was evidently an incubator, and Lorquas Pommel directed Tars Tarkas investigate it. The latter took a dozen warriors, including myself, and we raced across the velvety carpeting of moss in the little enclosure. It was indeed an incubator, but the eggs were very small in comparison to those I had seen hatching in ours at the time of my arrival on Mars. Tars Tarkas dismounted and examined the enclosure minutely, finally announcing that it belonged to the green men of Warhoon, and that the cement was scarcely dry where it had been walled up. They cannot be a day's march ahead of us, he exclaimed, the light of battle leaping to his fierce face. The work at the incubator was short indeed. The warriors tore open the entrance, and a couple of them, crawling in, soon demolished the eggs with their short swords, and remounting, we dashed back to join the cavalcade. During the ride, I took occasion to ask Tars Tarkas if these Warhoons, whose eggs we had destroyed, were a smaller people than his Tharks. I noticed that their eggs were much smaller than those I saw hatching in your incubator, I added. He explained that the eggs had just been placed there, but, like all green Martian eggs, they would grow during the 5-year period of incubation until they were obtained the size of those they had seen hatching on the day of my arrival in Barsoom. This was indeed an interesting piece of information, for it had always seemed remarkable to me that the green Martian women lay, as they were, large as they were, could bring forth such enormous eggs as I had seen the 4-foot infants emerging from. As a matter of fact, a new laid egg is but a little larger than an ordinary goose egg, and as it does not commence to grow until subjected to the light of the sun, the chieftains have little difficulty in transporting several hundreds of them at one time from the storage vaults to the incubators. Shortly after the incident of the Warhoon eggs, we halted to rest the animals. And it was during this halt that the second of the day's interesting episodes occurred. I was engaged in changing my riding clothes from one of my thoats to the other, for I divided the day's work between them. when Zod approached me and without a word struck my animal a terrific blow with his longsword. I did not need a manual of green Martian etiquette to know what reply to make, for in fact I was so wild with anger that I could scarcely refrain from drawing my pistol and shooting him down for the brute he was. But he stood waiting with long-drawn sword, and my only choice was to draw my own and meet him in a fair fight, with his choice of weapons or a lesser one. This latter alternative was always permissible, therefore I could have used my short sword, my dagger, my hatchet, or my fists as I had wished, and been entirely within my rights. But I could not use firearms or spear while he held only a longsword. I chose the same weapon he had drawn, because I knew he prided himself upon his ability with it, and I wished, if I worsted him at all, to do it with his own weapon. The fight that followed was a long one and delayed the resumption of the march for an hour. The entire community surrounded us, leaving a clear space of about 100 feet in diameter for our battle. Zod first attempted to rush me down as a bull might a wolf, but I was much too quick for him, and each time I sidestepped his rushes, he would go lunging past me, only to receive a nick from my sword upon his arm or back. He was soon streaming blood from half a dozen minor wounds, but I could not obtain an opening to deliver an effective thrust. Then he changed his tactics, and fighting warily with extreme dexterity, he tried to do by science what he was unable to do by brute strength. I must admit that he was a magnificent swordsman, and had it not been for my greater endurance and the remarkable agility of lesser gravitation of Mars lent me, I might not have been able to put up with the credible fight as I did against him. We circled for some time without doing much damage on either side. The long, straight, needle-like swords flashed in the sunlight, the ringing out upon the stillness as they crashed together with each effective parry. Finally, Zod, realizing that he was tiring more than I, evidently decided to close in and end the battle in a final blaze of glory for himself. Just as he rushed me, in a blinding flash of light, struck full in my eyes so that I could not see his approach, and could only leap blindly to one side in an effort to escape the mighty blade that it seemed I could already feel in my vitals. I was only partially successful, as a sharp pain in my left shoulder attested. But in a sweep of my glance, as I sought to again locate my adversary, a sight met with my astonished gaze, which paid me well for the wound and temporary blindness had caused me. Thereupon, Dejathoris's chariot stood 3 figures for the purpose evidently of witnessing the encounter above the heads of the intervening Tharks. There were Dejathoris, Sola, and Sarkoja, and as my fleeting glance swept over them, a little tableau was present which they stand graven in my memory to the day of my death. As I looked, Dejathoris turned upon Sarkoja with the fury of young tigress and struck something from her upraised hand, something which flashed in the sunlight as it spun to the ground. Then I knew what had blinded me in that crucial moment of the fight, and how Sarkoja had found a way to kill me without herself delivering a final thrust. Another thing I saw, too, which almost lost my life for me then and there, for it took my mind for the fraction of an instant entirely from my antagonist, for as Dejathoris struck the tiny mirror from her hand, Sarkoja, her face livid with hatred and baffled rage, whipped out a dagger and aimed a terrific blow at Dejathoris. And then Sola, our dear and faithful Sola, sprang between them. The last I saw was the great knife descending upon her shielding breast. My enemy had recovered from his thrust and was making it extremely interesting for me, so I reluctantly gave my attention to the work at hand, but my mind was not upon the battle. We rushed each other furiously time after time, till suddenly, feeling a sharp point of his sword at my breast and a thrust I could neither parry nor escape, I threw myself upon him with outstretched sword, and with all the weight of my body determined that I would not die alone if I could prevent it. I felt the steer tear into my chest. All went black before me. My head whirled with dizziness, and I felt my knees giving beneath me. Literature is literature, and we are adults. That is true. That is true. Whew. Well, that was intense, and I think that's a pretty good cliffhanger as well to leave us for our next read. John Carter goes down. I hope he's okay. Of course, the rest of the series would be incredibly short if he were to die now, but there we are. That is our reading session for tonight, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this read. Let me know your thoughts. Are you excited to hear more? Heavy D still hanging out. Appreciate you. Thanks, guy. Absolutely. Matt Gooch, I appreciate you being here, fam. Always being always being present. I have faith in him. I have faith in him too, Rafa. I absolutely do. I mean, the book's named after him. There's a pretty good chance he's going to be okay. Always listening. I appreciate that, fam. Let me take a real quick gander. Glad I got to catch this one and I didn't fall asleep this time. Let's go. Well, that's good and bad, right? I always like to make sure that y'all can sleep. 24 likes on the reading stream. Nice. There are 7 books. There are 7 books in this series. Yep, this is the first of 7. Just take a peek and see who's currently on. Looks like JR came back on. I know he had to run for a. He had to run for something. All right, let's go check in with him. They build excellently, like the Expanse novel series. Excellent. I like that. They should all be public domain. They should all be public domain. I guess I probably should have looked it up because with the movie came out not too long ago, maybe they bought the publication rights, but I didn't have any restrictions from YouTube from the first read, so I think I'm good. 3 different rooms on 2 TVs and 1 phone. I appreciate you, New Zealand fam. So I am going to get myself some dinner and probably take a quick shower. And as you can see, I'm still kind of dressed for work. I literally shut down and then went live. So, are my favorite unsolved mysteries. Enjoy. What you gonna eat? I got a big old burrito. Yep, that's exactly it. How did you know? How did you know about burrito time? Burrito. All right. But super appreciate you all. We're gonna go check in with our boy JR. We're gonna go and see if he's all right. And we were in there hanging out before this stream, and then he had to run super quick. So I'll certainly keep those on the raid list though, Tyler. Thanks again, Kev. Good luck. Appreciate you all. Appreciate you guys. I'll take the corner piece. There's Kev. Enjoy your night. Can't wait for the next chapters. I appreciate y'all. See you on the next one. Indeed, next time we will see you on Thursday. We're going to be doing some custom artwork for Mr. Ryan Tran, as well as a few other things. I should be getting some mail by then too. So beautiful. Well, I love you all. Always remember, go out and get everything that you set out to get, and don't let anything stop you. But it takes $0 to be a good person. So always do it through Raffatin. Yes, Raffatin will be on Thursday. Thank you. Thank you, Matt. We will do a Raffatin on Thursday. So peace, love, and Pokemon, y'all. And thank you for believing in ghosts. Oh, he was reminding me for Thursday. I don't think he meant right now. All right. I love you all. Thank you so much. Enjoy your night. Oh, no, no worries.